What is up, guys and gals? Raziel here again with the video that was promised. Square Enix versus Blizzard Entertainment, or Final Fantasy XIV versus WoW, Part 3. In this video, we're going to get a little more into the nitty-gritty of Blizzard's and Square's communication and listening skills, and how they react to player feedback when they implement patches. So, let's fucking go.
I am Raziel.
Okay, now, anyone who has played World of Warcraft or any Blizzard product for an extended period of time, communication is probably a touchy subject. And why is that? Well, because over the years, Blizzard has become increasingly arrogant. I mean, as we talked about in my last video of the series, we talked a lot about the rise and fall of Square and Blizzard because of arrogance, and how Square's kind of recovered and Blizzard really hasn't. They're still on the same track. And Blizzard's even flat out lied to its community in the past about a lot of things. But we'll get more into that a little later in the video. For right now, I want to focus on the communication and responsiveness of both Square and Activision Blizzard when it comes to classes and problems of imbalance in their games. How each company gathers their information and feedback, and how quickly and effectively each company responds. And here's a great example of what I'm talking about, and it should provide us with the comparison we need to start drawing conclusions. Alright guys, so in the sample that we're going to be looking at, I picked one class from each game's most recent expansion. For World of Warcraft, that's Legion. For Final Fantasy XIV, that's Stormblood. For World of Warcraft, I'll be using the Blood Death Knight, and for Final Fantasy XIV, I'll be using the Warrior. And you might ask, why these two classes? Well, both were considered extremely underpowered at the launch of the expansion. Both classes were designed poorly and were fundamentally unviable for endgame content because of the bad design decisions that both companies had made. Now, there is something extremely fucking important to keep in mind when looking at these problems, okay? And each company's level of responsiveness in dealing with said problems, and that's this, so pay attention. Keep in mind, Final Fantasy XIV, with the exception of A Realm Reborn, has never had an alpha test or a beta test that the public participated in prior to the expansion's launch. Nor were huge game system overhauls for classes or entire game systems accessible before launch. Launch day or early access day, which is 4 days prior to launch, would be the first time anyone who plays Final Fantasy XIV got to experience any of the changes. So there's no way that these players could give feedback to Square during development because no one could play it. WoW is quite different in that respect. Class changes and balancing and overhauls in classes and game systems, talent trees. They have alphas, they have betas, stretching over months and months of time. Sometimes almost an entire year, as is the case with Legion. Which enables Blizzard to get just mountains of valuable feedback long before the game makes it into the hands of the general public. And as we'll find out, though, through this comparison process, Blizzard fucking sucks honey nut assholes at utilizing this feedback and time to get their game right, to get things balanced and at least at a decent level for the expansion's launch. So let's begin. Now, the Blood Death Knight had a lot of problems at Legion's launch. I'll link my video in the description below back when I played WoW with a video that I made about its huge laundry list of problems, and it's a video that actually gained quite a bit of popularity and Blizzard actually ended up seeing, which it may or may not have helped in the balancing to where Blood DKs are now. I'm not quite sure where they are now, but for the sake of this argument, let's just name the top 3 things at Legion's launch that made them one of the worst tanks in the game. Number 1, they had no straight mitigation cooldown. Blood Death Knights were the only tank class in the game, and one of the only straight up classes in the game. On top of that, that didn't have a single baseline ability to straight up prevent incoming damage. Now, what would be the fix for that is simple. Making the talent they had called Rune Tap baseline instead of a talent, or giving Blood Death Knights back the ability Icebound Fortitude, which was cut from the spec right before launch. Both of these options would have been easily implementable, via a hotfix. It wouldn't have to take the servers down to do it, just simply adding back an ability that they took away. The second big problem they had is the Blood Death Knight's main mitigation talent mechanic, which was Bone Shield. You had to keep that up all the time, or you'd be getting hit as hard as a DPS gets hit all the time. Would get taken away by dots and auras, making it so you just have to spam the same button just to keep it up the whole fight, which was a huge problem. Just hit Morrowind over and over and over and over again. It was a fucking disaster. The fix, just make it not lose stacks from dots or ticking aura ticks. Easy. Once again, something that could be hot fixed in. Didn't need a complete overhaul, just needed that one tweak. And to my knowledge, this still hasn't changed. I don't know, but we'll keep going. And then the final problem that they had, my third biggest complaint, was the poor talent trees, the poor talent selection. It had one of the most cookie cutter specs in the game at launch. You had no wiggle room for talents. You did all the same ones, or you were fucking bad. So many talents were just 100% useless and would never be touched under any circumstance. Now this would take a patch, a client-side patch to fix, which is why I listed it third. But the two first issues, like I mentioned, that's not the case. Now, keep in mind here, guys and gals, back to my previous statement. Blizzard opened the alpha for Legion on November 23rd, 2015. Legion's pre-expansion, when all the major changes and game systems overhauls was patched on the 19th of July in 2016, and the official launch was August 30th, 2016. So, all in all, they had over 9 fucking months worth of feedback on each and every class before the official launch day. I was there, people. I saw the tremendous amount of constructive feedback that was given to Blizzard over these 9 months. Even the alpha forums, even if you weren't in the alpha, you had access to read those forums to see what people were saying. MMO Champion was consistently listing all the changes. And I contributed quite a bit to the feedback. I was in the alpha, I was in the beta. I saw thousands of fantastic suggestions and solutions on how to fix these and a lot of other class problems. Granted, there were some that were trolly and stupid, but there was a lot of great feedback and a lot of great suggestions for Blizzard. And what did Blizzard do? They ignored it mostly. And Blizzard, how I look at them now compared to how they were when they were making, Vanilla WoW, and when they made StarCraft 1 and Diablo 2 and those kind of games. I look at them now as like a child. They'll flat out do the opposite of what is good for the game, and if it's a good idea that's suggested, if it didn't come directly from someone internally in their brains. Again, back to the arrogance thing. All 3 of the DK problems I listed were pointed out and fixes were suggested for 9 goddamn months. Now, when did Blizzard finally do anything about these problems? Well, problem number 1 was addressed. Icebound Fortitude was given back to the Blood Death Knight on October 25th, 2016. That's 13 weeks after the changes to the classes were introduced in the Legion pre-patch. That's 3 months and a week. Okay, you on the same fucking timeline here? People, problem number 2 was never addressed before I quit. And after doing research online for the sake of this video, it still hasn't been addressed. Problem 3 has only been slightly addressed with the worthless, never taken talent Soul Gorge finally removed and replaced with a mediocre talent now. But that wasn't done until the 13th of June 2017, 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. That's nearly a fucking year after pre-patch. 11 fucking months, man. Alright, now let's compare this to Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood's Warrior. Now, I don't play a warrior. I haven't since A Realm Reborn. But as a tank class myself, I was hearing all kinds of rage and complaints on on the Final Fantasy forums, on Reddit, all over about Stormblood's launch, and in no small part in the actual game itself, people just not liking the warrior. It was simply a chore to play. The rotation was fucked up. It was the bottom tier tank. It was squishy. Everyone hated playing it. Healers hated healing it. DPS hated being in a group with them because they would pull threat off the tank all the time with ease. Now, I'm not gonna read out all these, but here's a list right here on the screen I've compiled from a Reddit post some of the biggest complaints that people had about the warrior. I mean, it lost its fluidity. It lost a lot of its cooldowns. It lost its ability to self-heal like it used to be able to. It lost the cooldowns it did have were piss poor. So go ahead and you can see this list, and there's quite a other few lists I didn't want to clutter up the screen with, but there was a long list of the warrior. I mean, there was even a website, a review website that said like the warrior class should be avoided at all costs. It was just completely 100% horrible. So what did Square Enix do about it? Well, for lack of a better phrase, they fixed it. They pretty much did an overhaul once again to the class. In 4.01, they fixed the threat generation for it, so DPS wasn't pulling threat, and started. That was their initial changes to the class and to a lot of other classes too at the same time. And this was done on July 3rd, 2017. Less than a month, just two and a half weeks after the launch date. Then in 4.05, they fixed the majority of the other problems. Fixed cooldowns, took away rage costs, completely overhauled the rotation to the point to where warriors are very happy now for the most part. And the 4.05 was just released 13 days after 4.01. All of this was done off of feedback that Square got about the warrior, and they did it to a couple other classes too. Scholar is one of them. In the span of a week or two, they got the feedback from about 2 weeks of feedback, and then made these huge changes. They knew players weren't happy and were not enjoying the class, and that the balance was completely out of whack compared to the other tanks. Again, note, this is in bold here, okay? Stormblood had no beta or alpha that the public played. Squaresoft got no feedback apart from their own internal tests before launch, and yet they were still able to make huge changes within the first month of release. Blizzard, on the other hand, had 9 months or more of feedback and changed nothing but their own fucking tampons throughout the whole entire time. 9 fucking months of feedback ignored. I mean, something else that springs to mind, for me right now, is the interview before Legion launch where Ian Hazzikassa said they wanted to actively avoid nerfing things that were good and buffing things that were bad because of how Legion was designed. Nerfs would devastate players because once you chose your primary artifact spec, you were essentially stuck into it. You were in it for the long haul unless you wanted to, backtrack and kind of start all over. And changing to a different spec would be a massive catch-up grind. And of course, going back to the lie factor, this hasn't been the case. In the first few months of release, most of the hot fixes that Legion got were not just like nerfs to little, abilities here and there. They were blanket archetype nerfs, blanket nerfs to tanks, blanket nerfs to an entire spec, things like that. I remember like tanks specifically, mages got some, and while other classes like the warlock were left struggling, and trying to keep up to even be somewhat viable, all the way up till patch 4.1, which is months and months later. I mean, we could draw comparisons like this, Final Fantasy Scholar and Legion's Warlock, the Blood Decay to the Warrior all day, but I want to get a little deeper. I've made the statement, multiple times that Blizzard's is full of arrogance. I mean, why else would they avoid making their own jobs easier by listening and implementing valuable ideas and feedback from their most experienced veterans that play the game? I mean, I was able to dig this up. This is a little older of an article. It's from back in 2013. It was an interview with a ex-Blizzard employee. Well, they talked about all kinds of games. They talked about Diablo, StarCraft, World of Warcraft, and a bunch. But there were three questions that really stuck out to me in their answers, and I'm going to put those here. All right, so I know I said there were 3 primary questions, and that is still true, but there are some sub-questions, asked on the tail end of these questions, and I'm going to include those as well. Anyway, let's get started. The first question was, why does the story in all Blizz games suck? Why does it suck now? The Blizzard employee, the ex-Blizzard employee, said, why does it suck? Money. They have a lot of it, and they don't give a shit if the story sucks or not. They countered that with Metzen became so internally powerful and big-headed that the people with actual creative talent could no longer rein him in. Or does he simply not give a shit anymore? And again, this is back when Chris Metzen was a part of Blizzard. He has since retired. But the employee responded this. I really can't say what the storyline for any of the games sucks the way it does because I'm not a writer or a developer, so I couldn't even make that call. I don't know what goes on in the minds of those guys or why they put out the content that they do. We all know it's bad and inconsistent, but that's the way they want it for whatever reason. I do think they place more emphasis on gameplay than storyline, which is why it's the way it is, but I also do believe Metzen had the monopoly on all creative direction when it comes to story. So if it doesn't sound good, no one can really do anything about it. My views on that is, it makes sense. I mean, he's been gone for, I think it's like a year now, year and a half, 2 years maybe. The stories are still bad. You still have to go to a novel to get them. But to get, in depth or go on the wiki page. I definitely believe that Chris Metzen, his baby, his big idea was Warlords of Draenor, and we all saw how fucking awful that was. Anyway, on to the next question. Why the hell does StarCraft 2 take so long? LOL, that was totally up to the devs for that one. I have no idea why it took so long, but I can tell you that why I personally wasn't working on it during that time. My friends were doing QA for it, and it was basically hell for them. Working 14 days straight, 12 14-hour days nonstop. I feel like the devs wanted it to be perfect before they released it so they could prove to everyone that they were the shit. In reality, though, I just think they didn't have their shit together enough and couldn't collaborate properly to get it out on time. With which the interviewer then replied, whoa, huge StarCraft fan here, expand on this. They always come across as nice guys, even if they are a bit stubborn and when they make balance patches. And the guy replied, I'll say that working with StarCraft 2 devs can be challenging because they don't tend to want to listen to your suggestions. They can also come across as quite dickish because they feel they can do no wrong. Mind you, there are some very nice devs on that team that actually give a shit, but some of the more esteemed devs have a superiority complex for sure. And this is probably the case, and probably 10 times worse, for their other teams, for games that are more established, like Diablo and definitely World of Warcraft. That's, my opinion. Again, take everything that you read, and I take everything I read with a grain of salt here, but, disgruntled ex-employee, but at the same time, you've got to look at their product and then this, and you see that it makes sense. Number 3. Why is Ghostcrawler such an unrepentant shitheel? Haha, welcome to the majority of devs at Blizzard. Wow. Okay, that says a lot. The person then responds with, that doesn't really surprise me, but at least most of them are better about obfuscating it where they're dealing with their player base. Was he as much of a self-absorbed asshole in person as he is on the forums and on Twitter? And again, we know that Ghostcrawler is no longer with the company, though I don't think Celestion's much of an improvement. And he responds, oh yes, he was. I can tell you a story. This was when we were customer service department had a new policy where any new hires, no matter what department you were hired into, would have to sit with the game master for a few hours and see what it was like to be the face of Blizzard and how hard our job was. Well, they decided to include the executives on this one as well, and one day Ghostcrawler was scheduled to shadow a guy on my team. He basically spent the entire time on his phone texting, checking emails, or just leaving for long periods of time to make phone calls. He was so checked out from the experience that he left early because he was too good to sit there with a low-life GM. At least that's the impression we got. So, I mean, this interview is pretty revealing, with a little bit, a small, tiny glimpse into the inner workings at Blizzard. But let's get in a little more depth of how Blizzard and Square, communicate with their player base. And as you may or may not know, Square is pretty vocal about their intentions to the game. With their live letter from the producer that they do every month, and the developer's blog that is updated, every week to every other week. And not to mention the fact that they patch the game every month to every other month, sometimes multiple times a month, especially with major balance changes if things are way out of whack. In the addition to adding more content, WoW, on the other hand, has for nearly a decade suffered from most of its burnout that it gets is because of extremely long content droughts that the game is infamous for. Some of which spanning over a year in time. And of course, we constantly hear from Blizzard that their team is bigger than it's ever been and it's more productive than it's ever been. Yet, at the same time that they say those things, I'm looking at you, Warlords and Mists of Pandaria and all that shit, the content droughts got longer. And it's, it was a kick in the nuts, or the vag if you're one of the ladies, from a company to the player base. Straight up just lies. And then Blizzard would be silent about it though, and then they'd shift when confronted about it, while they were getting interviewed about their next expansion or what's coming. They'd have just a laundry list of excuses of why the wait was so long and how we're not going to do that again, we learned our lesson. But then it would happen again and be longer next time. Now, I'll give credit where credit's due. With Legion, Blizzard has started doing some live Q&As, and there's been, I think it was an average, I can't remember if it was 77 or 79 days between each major content patch in Blizzard, which is a huge improvement over the past. But we're not to the end of Legion yet, so nobody knows how long that drought's going to be again from, the time the very last patch of Legion hits and the pre-patch for the next expansion hits. But if I was a betting man, I would say it's going to be at least 8 months to a year of no content again, because that's just Blizzard's speed. But if you do notice in Blizzard's live Q&As, and when I was still playing the game, I watched all of them, the Blizzard people being part of that specific Q&A, especially if it was Ian Hazekassis, they would dodge the really hard questions, put excuses, that's a question for this guy or this, or we don't want to get too in-depth, especially when it came to things like class balance and class-centric ones, spec-centric questions, what their intentions were for the future. They, and again, I'm sure part of it is they want to avoid saying something and then it not happening because they're infamous for that, and then, they're called liars, which they are liars, but it's better just to avoid, I think Blizzard's stance on that probably falls under the category of no PR is good PR, but I disagree with that. But to each their own. And to contrast that, in Final Fantasy XIV's live letter, Yoshi P, who's the lead producer and designer for Final Fantasy XIV, on purpose goes after those hard questions and tries to answer them as best he can, even if he knows the answers may not be what the players want to hear. Let's also not forget that when World of Warcraft was at its lowest, during Warlords of Shitbore, they decided to just stop releasing sub-numbers to the game. And it's a practice that they had consistently done for over a decade, letting the player base know how healthy the game was. Or, let's look at another example of a completely different Blizzard game. The time that the lead developer of Diablo 3, who was Jay Wilson, said, quote, "Fuck that loser," unquote, publicly on Facebook, referring to the original developer of Diablo 1 and 2, when the original developer simply said that he would have gone a different direction if he would have been in charge of Diablo 3. He didn't say it sucked. He didn't rip on the game. He just said it wasn't the direction he would have gone. David Brevik, the guy who enabled Jay Wilson, the fat fuck, to ride on his coattails and even have a job in the first place. God, that really made me mad. Eat fucking shit, Jay fat fuck Wilson. I hope you die. Talk about the arrogance and no appreciation for those that paved the way before, those who set up, the success of future projects. Now, the most potent thing, in my opinion, about Blizzard in the interview with David Brevik, that David Brevik even said when asked about, why he felt Diablo 3 was a failure, and Blizzard North's separation from Blizzard, in mid-production of the original Diablo 3, was when he said, quote, "It shows that people that were involved in Diablo really did matter. And so I'm happy that it has come to light that how talented that group was and how unique and special that group was. I'm hoping that, as this happens very often in the industry, you see it with Call of Duty and things like that, when the people leave the game, changes, and it shows how critical people are in this industry." And close quote. I couldn't agree more. People passionate about their product, people who make games that they want to play themselves, with deep stories, great soundtracks, even graphics can take a back seat, but with real heart, and they love what they do. That's what made Diablo 1 amazing, StarCraft 1 and Brood War amazing, Diablo 2 amazing, Vanilla WoW amazing, Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King were amazing for those reasons. Final Fantasy XIV was amazing for those reasons. And then you look at the products created, by either company that weren't made out of that sort of place, that were made out of greed and arrogance and cash grabbing. Every expansion after Wrath of the Lich King is a good example. Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, great example, and a couple other Square products that have been made, in between Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV, were all a result of arrogance, why those games sucked so much ass. And the same thing with other huge companies, like, for example, 2K Sports. I know most of you guys probably don't play sports games, but all their games after have been copy and paste because it's greed and it's easy to do and there's no passion behind the projects anymore. Blizzard North left a short time before Activision acquired Blizzard, and we've seen how many talented people of Blizzard have left since Activision got their grubby little fucking hands on Blizzard, and more leave each year. I mean, MMO Champion, you can find them all. They've left because, why stay on a sinking ship? And I don't think it's a sinking ship in terms of how much money they make. It's a sinking ship. It's where gamers that have big dreams. It's where gaming dreams go to die. His blood-sucking corporations like that. Because if it doesn't make one extra penny, it's not going to get done. Fuck what will be fun for the players to do. And since that move, Blizzard has become more and more jaded towards their fan base. To be fair, World of Warcraft probably has the most toxic player base in the world, with the exception of Call of Duty, that I've said in previous videos. But I can't help feel that Blizzard has had a hand in creating such a toxic environment. With their desire to keep making all their games appeal more to millennials and that very player base, to players who obsess about Call of Duty, is the clientele that Blizzard's interested in grabbing. Because they'll throw in their mommy's credit cards, they'll spend money on garbage, and why put extra when you have a mindset of a greedy corporation like Activision? Why put in more effort than you have to, more resources than you have to, if you can make a shitty product and people will buy it anyway? And Squaresoft isn't perfect either. Like I said, their account system and support is still very archaic. Blizzard definitely has an advantage in accessibility and in reporting problems and setting up an account with them. They're no stranger to releasing a hot pile of goat shit. Like I said, Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was a fucking fiasco, just a disaster. And as I said in my previous video in the series, arrogance was at the helm of why that game sucks so much balls, and also why now Blizzard products tend to suck so much balls. But look at the turnaround Square made. Answer this honestly. Can you see Blizzard publicly apologizing for the state of any of their games? Can you see for the atrocity that is a terrible expansion, Warlords of fucking Draenor? And then even going further, can you see Blizzard compensating the burned player base while simultaneously creating a new game from scratch to replace the bad game? I sure as shit can. I can't see Blizzard even thinking that. Why? Because it costs money. Activision doesn't spend money that way. They don't spend money to invest in player trust. They spend the bare minimum to get the most back. I wouldn't even put it past them to do the polar opposite of that and try to find a way to make even more money off the bad game, and then use that failure to get their player base's hopes up for the next piece of RNG riddled garbage that they can shit out. I mean, at the end of the day, Activision Blizzard is a machine, and until it engulfs and liquidates the original Blizzard Entertainment entirely, it will only get worse with time. I mean, let's all remember some of the things that Blizzard publicly said they would never do, but have done since the merger with Activision in the light of scraping more money from their player base's hands. We have race and faction changes. Blizzard said they never do it. It happened, makes money. Server transfers. Said they never do it. Happens, makes money. Character boosts. In-game store. The WoW token, i.e. buying gold with real money. I mean, the biggest feature in Diablo 3 was a way to make money off selling virtual items. The god-awful fucking disaster known as the in-game auction house, the real money auction house. I guess the saying is true. Money is the root of all evil. And as the wise Yoda once said,
fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to warlords of Draenor.
Fucking joke. Anyway, guys, this has been Raziel. I hope you enjoyed my Final Fantasy XIV Square Enix versus WoW Blizzard series. I mean, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on the Blue Shitbird, and let me know down below what type of series you'd like to see me make next. Keep in mind, while Final Fantasy XIV is the main MMO I play right now, I'll be taking a brief break to start playing some Destiny 2 when it launches on the PS4 on September 6th. I was going to get it on PC. Actually, I wasn't going to get the game at all. I was off and on about it. I mean, I did enjoy Destiny 1, not year 1. I thought it was terrible, and I returned it. And then I got a free copy for my cousin. And year 2 and 3 where I had a lot of fun with a lot of friends playing it. So I said, I'll give Destiny 2 a shot, but I'm going to wait for a while, get reviews out for it. But then my wife actually got the game for me, pre-ordered it for me. I generally never pre-order games, but she pre-ordered it because she saw I was playing 1 a lot with my friends, and so she said, I'll get this game for you, and that was really sweet. But anyway, whether or not I'll make any videos about Destiny 2 remains to be seen. There's plenty of content creators for that kind of shit. I might do one or two here and there just for fun, but as always, guys, keep it real, and I'll have more Final Fantasy XIV content coming your way soon. And if you are a fanboy raging in the comments now, chances are you raged way earlier, didn't even make it to this point, but feel free to check out my fanboy-centric video here, and also don't forget to fuck yourself on the way there. If you made it to the end of the video, leave a rude comment about Jay Wilson in the comments section. This has been Raziel, guys. Keep it fucking real.